Now, I just want to check the timeline. Might be off, might be right, I don't know. Would this have been around the same time that Samoa Joe was in UPW?
Yeah. He was one of my teachers.
Awesome.
Yeah, he was great. Joe's a great guy. He has that gruff, rough exterior, and he pretty much is that. But if you know him, if he likes you, he's kind. But at the same time, he still has that way about him. And I know he took a liking to me because he would ask me and my partner to stay after class to take moves. And for him, I'm sure that sounds great, like, because he just gets to do these moves on these rookies. And we think it's awesome because he's an established wrestler and he's one of our trainers. And we didn't necessarily know who he was at that point, and he was still kind of coming up. But we knew he kind of had a decent following about him. But it was just cool for us to take moves. It's like, wow, he thinks we're good enough to take moves. And looking back at it, like, he just didn't want some young idiots hurting him when he's doing these moves on him. Plus, he gets to do cool moves on people, so that's always fun.
So basically, all that stuff that he was doing in the 2000s as the Ring of Honor World Champion, he was trying out on you guys first.
Yeah. So, and we were glad to take it. We were glad to take that stuff from him. He's a good guy, and great trainer.
Awesome. So all along, as you were going through your pro wrestling career after having trained and started up Pro Wrestling Guerrilla and doing all the fantastic things you did in that promotion, being a 5-time tag team champion and everything else, always in the back of your mind, you still had that love of comics.
Oh yeah, definitely. I even had a match. It was dumb. It was a smaller fed, and it was like a tournament or something. And at the time, I was in a triad with me, Joey Ryan, and Funky Billy Kim, and the match was a 3-way versus, all of us versus each other. And there was a spot where I pulled a stack of comics from under the ring because we were trying to pin each other and we kept on getting in each other's way. And I slid out of the ring and I said, forget this. I pulled out a stack of comics and I sat in the corner and read comics during the match while they were doing their spots. And then Funky ended up rolling over some of my comics and it pissed me off. So I got up and I started wrestling and, I got back into it that way. So yeah, the love of comics has always been there. And then plus my finisher towards the end of my career, was that, it's like a spinning hook kick to the face when they're kneeling and the big fat kill. And that's actually named after a, Sin City comic book by Frank Miller.
Excellent. Yeah. So stayed with you the whole time. And then once you retired, hung up the boots, the second shift was, next thing up on your list.
Yeah. I actually, so when I started wrestling, I took a hiatus from drawing and, I can't go, half cocked on stuff. Like if I'm to pro wrestle, all I'm going to do is pro wrestle, and it's all I'm going to think about, and it's all I'm going to study. So I couldn't draw because drawing, it takes the same amount of effort. You have to really, for you to be great at something, you have to pour yourself into it.
Right. You have to be dedicated to the craft.
Absolutely. So I basically took a 10-year hiatus from drawing, to pro wrestle. And, briefly, 5 years in, I started drawing a little bit and it was really fun. And, I was like, no, it's affecting my wrestling. I have to stop. So, the last year of my career, I was like, you know what? I really want to start wrestling again. And, I actually know my writer through wrestling. He wrestled under the name Mr. Excitement for Rev Pro, and he wrestled a few matches for PWG as well. And, we always got along through the years. We were always wrestling, we're wrestling the small circuit together. So, we'd always talk about Bruce Lee and comic books and basketball, we loved all the same stuff. And, he was always having me read his war stories. He loved writing comics, but there was kind of like war related comics, and that's not really my thing. And so he's always trying to get me to draw it as well. And I was like, you know what? How about you write my comic and I'll draw it, so that way you get it right. But I want to draw, the only thing I'm drawing is my comic. Regardless if the story sucks, I'm going to draw my own comic. And so, he obviously didn't want me to have a terrible story. So he's like, yeah. And plus he loves writing. So, so he started writing my comic book and we started working things out. And, it was between him and another one of my friends who was also a writer, and I met him through wrestling, Dino Winwood. He was in PWG as well. And so both of them actually, write my comic. Predominantly it's Ed, he pens under E. Bronson. And And so he writes the majority of it, whereas Dino, he writes the villain of the story.
Excellent. Well, I've been dominating the conversation so far, and I've got a million questions about the second shift, but I want to give my co-host, Great Sudoku, a chance to ask a few questions as well. And if he doesn't get to one of mine, then I'll get back on the tag. So,
Okay.
Jason, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think Stevie knows where I'm going with this, me being the resident Japanese wrestling aficionado for AngryMarks.com. You had the chance to wrestle just an icon in my eyes and a lot of people's eyes, workers, fans, whatever, in the Great Muta. And I was wondering if you had watched Muta growing up, if he was an inspiration of yours, and what that experience was like working with the Great Muta.
You know what's funny is I actually, growing up, the only wrestling I ever watched was WWE or WWF back in the day, and I couldn't watch WCW because it gave me a headache. It was too. I don't know why. I don't know. No offense to anyone, but like I don't know if the southernness of it kind of was like it just was so out of what I knew. Growing up in California, I was like I don't understand what I'm watching, and this. It's doing something to my brain which I don't like, so I couldn't watch that much WCW, but obviously that went away as I got older, because I realized I don't know why it went away, but I could start watching WCW like when it started getting good.
It got a little better. It went from like Dungeon of Doom to NWO, so that headachy kind of WCW went away for a little while.
I'm trying to remember the stuff that I would watch, and I would just like I can't do it. It was like. I think I started trying to watch it because Lex Luger went back to WCW, or it might even been before that, and Ric Flair, and I knew them from their WWF stints, and then there was always Sting, and then he'd always be gorilla pressing people, and I'm like, but he's so small, and then they always say he's deceptively strong for his size, and it just bother me for some reason. I don't know, I couldn't get over it. But and I didn't even know about Japanese wrestling. I didn't know about Japanese wrestling until I started training. There was a couple of guys that I were training with, and they would always talk to me, and they would talk to me like I knew about Japanese wrestling. And they go, yeah, so oh man, he had this amazing match and yada yada yada. I'm like, oh really? Oh man, that's awesome. I want to watch that sometime. And I had no clue what they were talking about, but I faked the funk enough to where they were good with it. But then as soon as I started training, like that was kind of my exposure to everything. And, I started watching WCW, and then that's when, I found out about the Great Muta there, and, like just other wrestlers, and started watching Japanese wrestling. And then, I think at the time, Torimon was really big, which became Dragon's Gate. And so I was watching that, and I thought that was amazing because, I was watching, Lucha Libre and then the Japanese style, and then that was the hybrid of both. And that was just kind of blowing my mind. It was just like, they're so efficient and they're so quick, and I liked that element of it. I was, forcing my brain to turn off the fact that no one was selling, and so it was just kind of interesting to be exposed to all these different types of wrestling at once. And I had no clue about the indies. I had no idea of their existence. So just being exposed to everything, and then finally, years and years later, after studying hours and hours and hours and hours of Japanese wrestling. Finding out that I was going to wrestle the Great Muta was amazing. I was like, holy shit. He's like the Japanese Hulk Hogan, like you don't get much bigger than him. And
not at all. And what was that like for you?
It was pretty amazing. I got a funny story about that. So before the match, I was talking to Muta and his partner brought me over to him. And so he looked at me, and they were talking to me about stuff. And Muta's like, go get your partner. And then so I found Joey. I brought him over. I was like, hey, Muta wants you to go over there. He goes, okay. So we get over there, and Muta looks at Joey. He like gives him a once over, looks him from head to toe, and he looks back at me and he goes, you, high spots. So Muta designated me to do all of the wrestling with him. So I thought that was really funny. And so it was just an amazing experience, and I could have retired right after that and been good. So
that would have been a good note to go out on. But yeah, that was Yeah, like you were talking about watching Toriumon and watching WCW. It was just such a wonderful time for wrestling back then when there were so many promotions, both stateside and in Japan, that were running, and WWE was doing their thing, WCW was doing their thing, ECW was doing their thing. And it was, the late 90s was just, just kind of a wonderful time for wrestling in general. And before we went on the air, you and Stevie were talking about it a little earlier, about the celebrities that would make appearances with your promotions there. And we were talking a little bit before we went on about Bob Saget. How did Bob Saget get involved with pro wrestling?
Well, from what I know with Bob Saget, he was actually at a small show, SoCal Pro in San Diego, more Oceanside area. And he was filming a pilot, I believe, for a new show he was testing out. And it was like, Bob Saget goes and does random things. I don't know the name of the show, but that was basically the whole deal with the show. It's just like, okay, every episode he's going to go do something random. And so the random thing he was doing for the pilot was going to a pro wrestling show. And so that was interesting. He was a really cool dude. He was, taking pictures with everyone. He was super nice, just a nice guy.
Because I think he would be great for indies on color commentary, especially if there wasn't someone that had like a promotion that didn't have a national TV deal, but maybe something distributed to YouTube where Bob Saget could just be blue and could just curse a blue streak, but also learn a bit about wrestling in the process. I think he would be a very interesting color man, if not a very blue color man.
Yeah, I agree. He'd be pretty amazing at it. I don't know how much, honestly, I don't know his likes and dislikes. I don't know how much he really likes pro wrestling, or if it was just a gimmick for that episode or what. But yeah, it was cool, and he was just super cool to everybody, and he would be amazing at color commentary.